Yeah, just takes a second, then we'll start. Okay, so we started the streaming of today's session, and yeah, I would like to give you a little introduction. So the idea of these roundtables is a little bit different. So we had previously mainly talks in spring, but now we want to have a mix of talks and roundtable discussions. So yeah, you are free at any time, to ask questions, giving contributions to the discussion. I only wanted to structure it a little bit so that yeah, we go from topic to topic. So I made a little structure into it. So I think at the beginning we should try discuss lockdowns, as an idea to reduce infections. We could also compare it to other diseases where lockdowns have been made, and why are they maybe more or less successful. We maybe should also, look a little bit at the side effects of the lockdowns. So you had some bad side effects, you had some good side effects. Bad side effects are definitely that, you had a lot of people being isolated, not being able to talk to anyone and such things. And also, for example, you have certain political effects. That was just something where I read an article this morning. So in many nations in the world, lockdowns are also used, to act against, for example, political, enemies or adversaries. But there are also positive aspects of lockdowns, by the way. So, for example, there were these images, if you remember, in spring of dolphins in Venice. So, they took back nature in that way. Also, air pollution was reduced in many areas of the world, and that definitely was a positive effect. So we can discuss that a little bit. But I would, so after this general introduction, I would like to discuss things. So we should really discuss short versus long lockdowns. This is very important also because, for example, the economic side effects are very different, and also because behavioral patterns are very different when you have these different, short and long periods of lockdown. And then I think a very important matter is the distinction between synchronized and desynchronized lockdowns. What I mean by that is you can see that most of the initial lockdowns in spring were synchronized, most often even nationwide. So you had complete lockdowns, in nearly every European country at least, also in China. Then at the moment, you have definitely more this idea of asynchronized lockdowns, where only certain parts or even very small regions of the country are in lockdown. And of course, then you have typical problems like, how can you control that people are not going in and out of these lockdown regions and things like that. And also, of course, it seems that these unsynchronized lockdowns have a certain effect on behavior. So they seem generally not to be obeyed as much or not as much supported by the public as these early lockdowns. Yeah, and then indeed, as the next topic for the discussion, I would like to look at the interdisciplinary aspect. So this is Now, first, this was only with respect to the epidemiological implications, but of course, we have to have an interdisciplinary discussion, because definitely, for example, behavior plays a role. So, what do we know from sociology? What do we know from other behavioral science? How such lockdowns should be planned? Then, of course, and that is, I guess, something we have to shift a little bit, but we can touch it today. These are the economic consequences of lockdowns. It's clear that there is a trade-off between the need for lockdowns for epidemiological reasons and not having lockdowns because of economic reasons. So this will, I'm sure this will pop up several times in these roundtables and also in talks we will have. And then I think as a last aspect for today, we can touch a little bit on the data situation. So there are contradicting data in some ways, that data are used for, for either underpinning this lockdown strategies or that lockdown strategies. But we have to look a little bit closer if these data really suggest what some people at different sides of the argument are really saying. And we have also seen, for example, in the political discussion of the lockdown, that the availability of the information, for example, on the number of infectants and also the regional distribution of that did play a dominant role. Okay, so this is how I would like to structure the discussion. But first, I think we should go back to the, essentially epidemiological aspect of it. And so Steffen has prepared some little modeling aspects of that. And I think Steffen should start just to remind us and to see actually what we can do in principle with modeling of lockdown.
Okay, for this, I think I share my screen. Mm-hmm. Then you will see directly what I'm talking about and what we are doing on Tuesdays. Yeah. We took a very simple model for simulating the pandemic. It's not exact COVID because setting up the parameters for this problem is not that easy because it's a bit too simple. But we basically look on a SRR model, but we keep track of the dead people. So we distinguish in each type between untested and tested. It's important because we are used, the only observables we have are the tested ones. The dark figures we don't have access to. So I distinguish between them both. Our system is based on rules, and we have these rules that simulate the infection or the recovery or death of individuals, and also we have the testing. This special case where some people lose their immunity, we didn't cover in this model, but we could. So, but to keep things simple, I prefer set them the rate 0 for this. It's done via in Python and using the Gillespie algorithm, but with an additional discrete time step, so with that we can report the number of newly infected, tested ones, or the incidence, like in Germany, for example, or the effective reproduction numbers that we are used to at the beginning of the pandemic. So there are a lot of functions, but we keep on the outputs. And I think I will create a new view for this. Sorry, I have to shift view. So, okay. I basically set up the parameters for this problem inspired by the real COVID. But if I only use an SIR model for this pandemic and set the parameters from some studies, the whole disease would explode right at the beginning, because we don't have any exposed or carrier states that nothing would delay the infection. So here in the SIR model, the infected get immediately infectious. So I had to scale the parameters a bit down. And because it's a stochastic algorithm, I only consider a small village in this part. But if you have more time, we could enlarge these numbers, of course. I implemented 3 different strategies of lockdowns. One is the fixed, so we simply set the time interval for it. And the other 2 are adaptive, based on the incidence number or based on the effective reproduction number. So, but first let's have a look on if there's no lockdown. If no lockdown, you see clearly this exponential increase at the beginning, and that at some point they either die or recover at some point. So the disease will get rid of it itself. But of course, we don't see these actual numbers because we only have access to the tested ones. So I created some measures like we are used to on a daily basis. For example, the red bars are the number of the newly infected per day. And based on these numbers, we can calculate the incidence. That's the sum over 7 days divided by the total number of the village people. And we have this famous reproduction number based on the definition the Robert Koch Institute uses. It's based on some sliding averages. And these are the numbers we we have access to. So the first part is we set some lockdown. 1 means total lockdown, shut everything down. 0 means do nothing. So the intensity of this yellow bar will resemble this severeness. Of course, we see at the beginning, if we make the lockdown too early and too short, it won't change anything. And that's quite sensible. If we make it too long, it basically shifts the whole infection. But the number of dead people is almost the same. So it's a nice way to introduce this lockdown. I'm sorry, there's some delays in calculation. But we have to shift this part in at the beginning of the infection, where the exponential growth is the biggest, maximum. So now I had the impression at the beginning, it was basically on, oh, should we do or should we not go into lockdown? There won't any measures of besides this effective reproduction number. But here, for example, you see the effect of the lockdown. It decreases immediately the number of newly infected, which you can see here in this graph too. And the reproduction number goes down, the incidence goes down, which is really fine. But as soon as we go out of the lockdown too early, the whole infection explodes again. So it's crucial to set the time scale and the end of the lockdown in such a way that we shift the whole to the end. And I think that's the main purpose of lockdowns, to shift the infection or make it wider. There was this expression, flatten the curve. And basically that's my impression, lockdowns have this goal. So, but now let's have a look on other methods. I used here a threshold based on incidence. So as soon as the blue curve goes above 50, we impose lockdown. That's some value we know from Germany, for example, for the traffic light are alarm red. But of course we can say, make it slower. The effect is almost the same. It will shift the curve more to the end. But you have to consider this threshold, of course, very wisely. Because if you make it too low, you have almost the same amount of time you're in lockdown as with some fixed scale. And if you make it too high, you don't have any effect. The same principle you can make with the reproduction numbers. And here I said the critical value is of course 1. Because it's above 1, it would increase. Below 1, the infection will die out. So this is another method. And here I think it's both have advantages and disadvantages. Because, for example, if you only base on the incidence number, you would simply stay at this niveau, because you don't get the rate of increasing, the slope basically of this curve. But if you only take this reproduction number, which basically measures how fast the infection will increase, then it's too short, because as soon as you make some lockdown, the infection rate would decrease. And then, okay, we say, yeah, we can get out of the lockdown, and then, it would increase again. So that's not the optimal solution, because I don't think any village or population would make a lockdown every 3rd, 6th day, and the first thing in the morning is to look in the news, are we in lockdown or not? That would be impossible. But I think a mixture of both values should be a nice way. So yeah, that's basically all. Just a short glimpse into this modeling aspect. I will upload it at the weekend in our repository, so you can play with it by yourself. Okay, thanks for your attention. And are there any questions, or should I stop the screen sharing?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea now to allow questions on that, and to have it in front of you just for a few more minutes, just for potential questions. So yeah, if you have a question, just use your microphone. I think we are, not such a large group, so it should be okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
My name's George. Hi. I don't know if I've met many of you guys before, so hello. Thank you very much for showing us that. You talked about the purpose of lockdowns being, primarily and maybe uniquely just to flatten the curve. So do you think that means that lockdowns themselves wouldn't, in the long run, reduce the total number of infections? Eventually, you will get the same number of people infected, whether you put people into lockdown or not?
At least in this model. If you make the lockdown very big, of course, it would reduce the total number of infected too. But yeah, I had to start earlier. Then this would be. But you see, sometimes they are recovering from the numbers catch up. So yes, basically for this SIR model, this is the problem, that lockdown only shifts the curve.
I think that's true of what would happen in reality. Do you think that?
Well, I should say I should make one essential remark, and that is, because later we want to discuss synchronized versus asynchronized lockdowns. This is, of course, an SIR model for a single compartment, right? So it would be one large region where every infected individual has the same probability to meet any other individual. That is, for example, not describing something like a wave, which you see currently in large countries such as the US, where you can clearly see a geographical spread through the nation. Here, everything is just collapsed to one compartment. So we can only discuss at the moment with this model how it would be if there is really a high mobility inside this region which we are looking at, and then what it would mean that we have this lockdown. But we cannot discuss any other aspect at the moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it is. It does. Thank you.
Is there any other question to the simulations? So I think what was very nice to see is really this difference between the two strategies. One of a permanent lockdown of a certain length and strength, and the other one implemented as a lockdown which just is saying what the is just using a threshold, and if the number of infections are too high, then you go into lockdown. This is actually true, for example, in Germany. You have exactly this. In principle, you have this strategy, but as Steffen rightly pointed out, it will be, if you are just very close to the level of infection and you have a lockdown, then you cannot look up at the numbers every day and then decide whether the next day you are in lockdown or not. This is, of course, just a theoretical strategy. It's not a very practical strategy to use. So, any other questions on the simulation? Okay, well then we might come back to it later if it's relevant for the discussion, and we leave it here at the moment. Okay, so let's right into this idea of lockdowns. So we should really discuss first short versus long lockdowns. We had now a little bit seen the effects for this excuse me, for this specific model. And we also discuss then synchronized versus synchronized lockdowns. And now you can, if you like, you can already also not only discuss the epidemiological effects, but you can also bring in some data aspects or behavioral aspects to that. So what is the opinion of the participants about why the initial lockdowns in Europe in spring, why they worked relatively well? Yeah, Luca? You can use, by the way, your hand tool, and I will see it better. But Luca? Luca, your microphone is not switched on.
Yeah, sorry. So my opinion comes from the fact that I'm living in Italy. So I'm basically, I saw what happened here. And what happened here was that the lockdown was a real lockdown. Basically, everything was shut down. And this was done in 24 hours, 48 hours. Okay. So, and for this reason, I think it was working. At the moment, in fact, we are in a very different situation. The government is trying not to shut down everything in order to somehow defend the economy and somehow the social life, the minimal social life, and that is much more difficult. I mean, it's really not clear to us. It is not really clear to us whether this will be at some point working. So in fact, the number of incidents is increasing, not exponentially, but pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think that's true. And what about behavioral patterns? So, you know, I think Italy is a very good example of having shown a lot of solidarity, you know, at the beginning.
Okay, so that was that was the good point. We eventually managed somehow. I think we grew up a little bit, much more. Well, Italians are a bit strange in the sense that we usually don't follow rules somehow, or at least it is well known that Italians don't follow all the rules. Besides the rules applied in the kitchen. So there are rules in the kitchen and we follow those rules, but not in the social life. Well, instead, we actually managed to follow these rules during the lockdowns. It was quite impressive for all of us. And the solidarity,
that was also my impression.
And the solidarity was very good. The basic point now is that obviously, the side effects of the lockdowns was that our economy, which is already weak, got even weaker, and there are now various subset of the population which are not very well, are not in very good shape. And it's clear that more resources must be used in order to restart the system somehow. And maybe to renovate the system, to change things that has to be changed.
So do you think Italy now...
Tell me.
Do you think now in Italy there would be a way, you know, like in Wales, the situation you have here in Britain, that you have one of these complete shutdowns, but because of economic reasons, you just impose it, say, for 2 weeks or something like that? Do you think that would help?
It is not at the moment. It's really not clear. We are somehow at the moment in which all these ideas are discussed, and the situation is that regional governments are actually taking most of the decisions, and they are trying to find a sort of modulation with the national policy, general policies that was passed. So that's the main issue at the moment. But what I was saying is that there is one good effect, which I like. It seems clear at the moment, at least, that we understood that our NHS, the National Health System, which is a state system, must be defended. Okay, so to me, this is the most important message, at least at the political level, that is appearing.
Yeah. Well, especially in contrast to the US numbers. I would say, yes.
Well, that's so obvious to me that now it's really, I would say, is an arithmetical fact, is a mathematical fact. And that was the only good point.
Yeah.
And people
that brings me. Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. That brings me maybe to another point, and that is, how do you actually, what do you think are the best data to measure how these lockdowns are obeyed? You know, would that be mobility data? Would that be mobility data? Would that be how often the police is called to, to crush these illegal parties, or what would be good measures for that? Has anybody an idea
That's a
about
good
that?
question. That's a good question.
Mm.
But certainly it's true that the number of police interventions and at least in the first period, I mean, during the first lockdown, they were not so many, the number of police incidents, if you want. Where the police had to come to somehow sort out the problem. And even the number of fines that were issued was not so high. Certainly, that was a good point.
Matthias, do you know any of these data from Germany? Any idea how this behavioral aspect is discussed in politics? Oh, your microphone is switched off.
The discussion in politics or in political science is about, if you're looking for measures concerning the obedience, then obviously the numbers, how often police is called, are something we can rely to. The mobility is a problematic measure, I think, because people are still allowed to move around a lot because of they have to go to the job, and hey, they're allowed to do this and that and so, and even the people in these regions that are locked down, for the southeast of Bavaria, Berchtesgaden in the moment, they can move out, of course. Yeah, then maybe if you're really looking for binds, then yeah, the call for the police may be a better option than the mobility.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's true. But so all of that is, of course, structured on a regional level in Germany, and also I think it's, for example, the same thing in the US, and also, but it's a little bit different in the UK, because here the numbers, and that brings me to another aspect. Here very often the discussion is who actually has these numbers, and how are they dealt with, right? So here, for example, in the confrontation, I should say, between the northern region, Manchester, and the central government here in Britain, very often the argument came up that actually the numbers were not known to the local authorities, because they are kept in national databases. I think the situation in Germany is just the other way around. So you have more federal databases, but the federal government doesn't know the numbers exactly. Is that correct?
You have the data every day for counties, for towns, and yeah, it's available to everybody. Robert Koch Institute is managing a dynamic map of all the counties and towns, and where you on in your hometown, in your home county. That's also, of course, available to
even to the public.
Yeah.
So is this about the incidences, or is it also about the contact tracing? Because theoretically, the contact tracing could give good information about how often people got into contact.
These numbers are not known to the public, but they are available, of course, for the health authorities, because they have to do the job. It's also done on the local ground, the towns and the counties. And
but is it available at the Robert Koch Institute? Or so here in Switzerland, we have the problem that it's collected from the towns and from the cantons, but the transfer to the Bundesamt für Gesundheit, so the overall authority, doesn't work. So there isn't any any national database, for instance,
Yeah,
which could then help for really data mining and trying to understand where the contact came from.
It was a great problem in spring. It's gone better now, but there's always a time lag. There's a delay from collecting the data on the shop floor and then send them to Berlin. And the data we actually have are about a fortnight old all the time. Yeah.
Could I ask Peter, for example, how the situation in the US is about the data? Do you have any knowledge about that, Peter?
No, I've stopped looking for it some time ago. There's tons of websites, even on the county levels of the state. So not just by state, but by county. I could look, if I get very worried about my neighborhood, I'd look up Montgomery County, but I haven't done that for 2 or 3 months. So I couldn't even tell you to what extent they pull their data from the usual Johns Hopkins, or if they've got something else, how they go about doing it, what they do with it. Sorry, I haven't really kept up with that. And let alone for any other remote counties in Tennessee or in Oregon, I have no clue.
But if it would be the Johns Hopkins University, then this would be a central database. So there is no central authority like the Robert Koch Institute. I know there is in the US you have this Center for Disease Control, I think it's called, right?
Yep.
And do they have a central database?
I don't even know that. I know that you find stuff on COVID on their website, obviously, but it's been even longer since I've looked that up. So I wouldn't know. I do remember, though, that there's some other research institutions as well which publish their own things that may or may not be fed by Johns Hopkins data.
Yeah.
What I guess, or what I venture to guess, is that no matter where the data comes from or where it's stored, it doesn't have all that much impact because of the political situation. So you probably follow the electoral campaign here with as much excitement as everybody over here does. And the latest accusation of Donald Trump was, if Joe Biden wins, he's going to listen to scientists. So that gives you, he was supposed to be an insult. And that gives you an idea of the polarization over here. So some people, I haven't left my house for months. And if you walk around, I've been to Washington. Okay, I've been to Washington once in the last 3 or 4 months to a doctor's appointment. And what I saw is that most people walk on the streets with masks, which my sisters tell me is not the case in Germany, except when you get near the White House. Funnily enough, there all of a sudden people walked around without masks. Now that may be a pure coincidence that you don't get that close to the White House anyway these days, but that's the only evidence that I've witnessed myself. Other than that, there's a strong divide, and whatever Dr. Fauci recommends and the scientists extract from the data, to a large sector of the public, it's irrelevant. And to the extent that it is relevant, it depends on the state and the governors, if they're Democrat or Republican, if they're more worried about their economy or Donald Trump's re-election or their own re-election. So that's as much as I can say, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, I think Peter makes a good point here. And that is, feeding into the discussion of behavior. I think the US is a clear example where this bipartisanship is destroying some kind of general sense of responsibility to diminish the infection. And of course,
just a word to the mentioning by Heike concerning data about the tracing. I still do not know if we have here in Germany a central database concerning that, but I think we should look for such data. I've looked for some articles concerning our topic today, the effectiveness of the lockdowns, and just to mention two, I had not the time to go very deep into them, but just to cite two of them. It's one by Vincenzo Alfano and Salvatore Ercolano. I don't know if anybody knows them. Nature, concerning the time. Their finding is that the lockdown in the comparison between the countries shows that it becomes effective 10 days after implementation and stays as much effective 20 days after implementation. That's concerning our discussion in the simulation. We saw that some middle range lockdowns would be effective. Together, another article, let me see if I find them, from Nature. Yeah, this one, what they emphasize is that much more interesting than the preventing people from getting in contact and spreading such the infection are the tracing. Is this the article or have I got the wrong one? Yeah.
So track and tracing, yeah.
Yeah, that's an argument you, Marcus, already used the last time, or that it's necessary to come before the wave again, so that the tracking and tracing will be effective. And these two findings bound together is exactly, I think, what Heike is pointing to. We should look for such data.
Yeah, that is, of course, my comment on that would be, if you have that strategy, that you have the lockdown in order to get to a situation where you have an effective track and trace system again, because after some time when the epidemic grows exponentially, surely any possible track and tracing system would fail. But then, this implies that this very much relies on the capacity and on the organization of the track and trace system, and that will vary a lot, I think, from country to country. I would even suggest, that was my idea for next time, that we discuss actually the effectiveness of track and tracing, as a follow-up to this discussion. But yeah, so I don't know. This is, of course, a little bit a different discussion, how track and tracing is actually working, and it would, I guess, also go into a discussion where all these technological abilities, like these COVID apps, are actually coming in. But yeah. I think one of the big problems about the track and tracing is that you really need to. I think it's more effective. Let's put it that way. I think it's more effective when, of course, you can locate people. So you have a lot of measures like you have these lists in restaurants. You have to sign up things. And then people, should not move too much. So that is, otherwise, if they move a lot, then the chain of the potential chain of infection is, of course, increasing rapidly, because you have to trace their movement. If you are not sure what was exactly the event when this guy got infected. So, And you also have to take into consideration if you are infective, how infective you are. That seems also to be one of the major points, because it seems that some people are very infective, some others are not so very infective, etc. So that would also maybe play a little bit into medical, into the medical area. Yeah, so I think the data aspect is very important. So any more comments on that? Yeah, Luca?
Marcus, yeah, I mean, just a question, but do you know whether there is any really track and tracing of these super spreaders? Super spreaders, these guys, this person who can spread a lot, who can be extremely efficient in spreading the infection.
Yeah, that is a very good question, Luca. But I think the super spreaders are only detected indirectly at the moment. They are not identified by any medical properties like genetics or measurements of infectivity, which is very hard. You would need to measure, for example, how many virus particles you have in the droplets when they are speaking loudly or something like that. This is very hard to measure, you can imagine. So this is not working. What you do is you take just the data about infection events, and then you see that certain locations are more infective, are more effective, and then you also see that certain persons you have tracked have infected many, potentially, of course, infected, because you can never be 100% sure. But it seems that from the data, there are certain persons who really infected, an order of magnitude more people than just others who also show the disease, but don't seem to infect people at all. This is, of course, now data that is coming from the track and trace system. This is also something you have to know, because only from these track and trace data you can make only then you can make these conclusions. So yeah, let's maybe.
There was another question: is what are the places? Well, in the various countries that we have now, that are more infected?
Yeah, that is a good. Yeah, that is a very good question. Of course, that is something we haven't covered today in the simulation Stefan showed, because we didn't have any incorporation of places as such. But I think this is an important aspect, and of course we could put that into the model. So and you could even have, based on such data, you could also think, of course, of alternative strategies of lockdowns, like just closing certain locations that are very, very likely effective. So, for example, just 2 months ago, I know in Germany there was this problem with slaughterhouses, for example. It seems that the virus very nicely attaches to surfaces here, and because it's a cool situation, it's also, and because there are a lot of metal surfaces as well, and we know actually from laboratory tests that the virus on certain metals can last for a very long time. Also, not only on metals, I should say, but also especially on plastics, the virus survives for a long time. There are certain metals like copper where the survival rate is actually extremely low. So it depends a little bit on the metal properties. But that is why slaughterhouses were very effective spreader locations. And so an effective lockdown, for example, would then just close slaughterhouses. Another way of major infections was, where these house parties people started to have in closed locations. So you had some events from, for example, certain religious gatherings, and you had super spreading events at just normally, parties, let's say, which were celebrating a certain family event or something like that. I don't know. I mean, this is the data I know. Maybe somebody knows more about this. I don't know.
So I can talk again about Switzerland. So here, I think 70% of the cases, the contact tracing doesn't work. So they couldn't find out where the people got infected. Yeah. And of the rest, 30%, it was mostly in private gatherings, but also bars and clubs played a role, and there were some super spreading events. So, and here is a big debate about closing down the clubs. And again, there is a strong lobbying from the club owners that they should be open. Kind of funny thing, one super spreading event was during a yodel concert. So because one of the singers yodelers was a super spreader, so very highly infective. I don't know whether everybody knows what yodeling is. For the Alpine countries, a very special way to sing and on a very high tone, and it's very traditional. So, and of course now everybody is making kind of fun of that.
Yeah. Yes, I think generally, I know of laboratory experiments for choirs in general, because choirs are also very infective, because they sing in synchrony and everybody's spreading the particles at the same time. So that's, unfortunately, I like choirs, but it's not a good idea at the moment to allow them to sing together too closely, in closed rooms especially. So let's maybe just discuss, I mean, we will do that next week as well, and we hope that we can find the data. But just to close the discussion, what do you think in the different countries, how effective and is the track and trace system? And what is the capacity of the track and trace system? That would, do you have any educated guess for that, so that we would know what we would need for the lockdown, to be achieved in the reduction of infections, such that the track and trace system would become effective. I guess Peter doesn't know this for the US because he hasn't followed it. Is that correct, Peter?
I think
or how is, or does Peter know how generally the track and trace system works in the US? Is that also by telephone? So would you get a phone call from your local council if you had been at an event where Peter is not here again. So how does it work in other countries? How does it work in Italy, say, Luca?
Oh, well, the situation is the following. So we have one of these apps that is, in principle, should allow but the app cannot be used on all the phones. I mean, you must have a quite updated phone, a cell phone, in order to use it. But the good track and trace here is done through somehow the place where you work. For instance, in schools, it's almost perfect. Whatever is happening there, we are traced. There's no way we can run away.
And you are traced by the school system, not
By the school together with the health system.
Ah, okay.
Students and teachers are traced in this way. Okay.
Yeah.
And pretty much in all public system, it's working like this. In private companies or banks, whatever, there is also the health system is providing the track and tracing. So whenever you feel sick and you are at home, then you have to tell the system that, okay, so you are sick for say 2 days, and then your local practitioner will provide, well, essentially will tell you that you have to take the test. You have to take the test. You go and take the test. Here the problem is that this might take time. We had various problems because very many people wanted to take the test anyway. So they went to the doctor and say, yes, please, I want to take the test. I want to check. And that's why we had many, we had several queues, and it was, took time to take the test. But in general, the tracing, it's working in this way. And it's not bad. It's not a bad problem. Our main problem at the moment is the transportation. So public transport are a place where most probably the level of infection is high.
Yeah. And does somebody from the British audience actually know? Because I actually don't know how the British track and trace system works. Does somebody know?
I don't know that much, but what I know is that besides the central system, there are also in various places there are local teams who do that.
Yeah.
The statistics that I see is that the central test and tracing that basically does things by phone and online, they are only able to reach about 60–70% of contacts that they get, but local teams are able to reach upwards of 90%. And I think
by local you mean?
Sorry?
By local you mean like at the university or so, or at a school?
Even towns, cities.
Okay.
Cities, I think particularly, I think it depends on the city authorities, but mostly, I guess, also places where there are higher infection levels. Not quite sure how they work. I think they probably partially work by phone, but mostly they actually knock on people's doors and actually warn them and that sort of stuff. And they actually can reach up to more than 90%. And what I don't understand, I haven't ever seen discussed, is why is this not done more in more places and more often? And my guess is either it's a matter of resources and cost, or it's because people think it's more like invasion of privacy and that sort of thing. So it may be.
But I think, sorry.
That was very helpful.
I think the track and trace is still a problem if the infection number is too high, because tracing them by manpower, that means manually by phone, works very well if the real numbers are not so high. If they would increase, you would rely on some computer or apps or something like that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. So yeah, I think it would be nice if scientists come up with better ways of track and tracing. I think personal track and tracing will have a much lower tracing capacity than any, at least semi-automated way. So you could have maybe a kind of data analysis pre-formatting at least, the cases, condensing them to likely tractable cases on some information, and then, you know, steering then to personal track and tracing. But what I read about a lot of these personal track and tracing systems is that they are indeed very inefficient, because some people are traced, for example, 10 times, you know, from different phone calls. And so, yeah, there is a lot of redundancy in the system, because nobody knows from the other one. There are usually no central databases where you can update who has been traced and tracked and so on. So this is certainly this is a technological aspect that needs to be considered for sure. Okay, I think we are out of time, so I would like to close for today. And